Thank you for tuning in to LeadDeveloper.com, where we simplify complex property development feasibilities, investment analysis, and everything real estate. Whether you're a seasoned pro or just starting out, our Google Sheets-based feasibility suite streamlines the toughest aspects of real estate. Lead Developer Feasibility Suite is trusted by thousands in over 17 countries. Our tools cover everything from quick assessments to detailed cash flow projections and more. Sign up today at LeadDeveloper.com for unlimited free access to our expanding library of real estate tools. No credit card needed. Plus, get full support through Edge with step-by-step guidance, exclusive courses, and resources designed for your success. Turn numbers into narratives that win over investors and lenders. Join Lead Developer now.
Hey everyone, welcome to our deep dive today.
Excited to be here.
We're tackling real estate cash flow forecasting. Might sound a little intimidating at first.
Yeah, but stick with us. It's important stuff.
We've got some excerpts from this blog post. Let's see. Ultimate cheat sheet for forecasting real estate cash flow.
Targeted at real estate investors, but the principles apply to anyone.
Exactly. And our mission today is to, well, we're not trying to turn you into financial experts overnight.
More about giving you that solid foundation, the key insights you need.
Without getting bogged down in all the super technical stuff.
We want to keep things clear and easy to understand.
Definitely. So no matter what your experience level is.
This is about equipping you to make smarter decisions in real estate.
All right, let's set the stage. Why is it so crucial to try and forecast those future returns in real estate? I mean, can't you just find a property you like and cross your fingers?
Well, you could, but that's kind of like walking into a casino and just throwing your money at the roulette wheel.
Not exactly a recipe for success.
Right. Every investment decision, especially in real estate, is a calculated bet. You're betting on what that property will bring in down the line.
It's about projecting those future cash flows, like how much rent you'll collect.
The potential for the property to increase in value, that appreciation.
And ultimately what you can sell it for down the road.
You got it. It's all connected.
Now, I'm remembering a friend of mine tried to flip a house a while back, didn't really understand the market that well, went mostly on gut feeling.
Ooh, that can be risky.
Yeah, it didn't end so well for him. Let's just say he learned a hard lesson about forecasting.
Ouch. Stories like that really highlight why understanding the fundamentals is so important.
For sure. So this blog post we're diving into, it breaks down the 5 key elements every investor needs to grasp. Starting with economic variables.
Right, those big picture trends that influence the entire market, like interest rates, inflation, job growth.
Then we've got projecting rent, which I'm guessing isn't as simple as just picking a number.
Definitely not. It's constantly shifting, influenced by all sorts of factors.
And then there are vacancies, those empty spaces, not just empty space.
Absolutely. Each vacant unit is potential income you're losing.
Oof, that hurts. And of course, the less glamorous side of real estate, but oh, so important, costs.
Yeah, those operating expenses, maintenance costs, they can really make or break an investment.
And finally, resale value. Most people aren't buying real estate to hold on to forever.
Right, the goal is usually to sell eventually. So understanding how to project that future value is critical.
It's about being proactive, not just reactive. I love that. It's not just about crunching numbers. It's about understanding the forces at play.
Exactly. And speaking of forces, let's talk about those market variables you mentioned earlier. You know, those factors that can really pull the strings of your cash flow.
Yeah, like puppet masters behind the scenes. So who are these mysterious figures?
Well, the big 3 that this blog post highlights are inflation, regional economic expansion, and vacancy rates.
Let's unpack those one by one, starting with inflation. It's on everyone's mind these days, prices going up. It seems like everything's getting more expensive.
It's definitely a powerful force. And in real estate, inflation can affect things in a few key ways. First, it can impact the discount rate that investors use to evaluate properties.
Discount rate, so that's like the rate of return they expect to get on their investment, right?
Exactly. When inflation is high, investors tend to demand a higher rate of return to offset that potential erosion of purchasing power.
It makes sense. They want to make sure they're actually making money after inflation is factored in.
Right. Another way inflation impacts real estate is by introducing uncertainty, because not all properties protect against inflation equally.
So some assets might appreciate faster than others, while some lag behind.
Right. It's like a race where some runners are faster than others. And then inflation also impacts your income stream itself. Rental income and property values tend to rise with inflation.
So rising property values might sound like a good thing, but it's not a straightforward win if inflation is eating away at those gains.
Exactly. It's a more nuanced situation than it appears at first glance.
Okay, so inflation is a complex beast. Now, what about regional economic expansion? How much does that really matter?
It matters a lot. Imagine you have two identical properties, one in a city that's booming with job growth, and the other in a town that's facing economic decline.
Okay, I see where you're going with this.
Which one do you think will attract more renters, command higher rents?
Definitely the one in the booming city. It's all about location, 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 but also the bigger economic context.
Exactly. The blog post even talks about things like construction cycles and business sentiment, how they affect different types of properties.
Can you give an example?
Sure. Imagine there's a ton of office construction going on, but companies are downsizing and moving towards remote work.
Oh no, that doesn't sound good for the office building owners.
Not at all. Vacancy rates would likely go up, and rents would probably fall.
So timing and being aware of those larger economic trends is everything.
Okay, and then we've got vacancy rates. I get that an empty unit means no rent coming in,
Right, it's lost income.
but is there more to it than that?
There is. There's this concept called the natural vacancy rate. It's kind of like the sweet spot where landlords have some pricing power, but without deterring tenants.
So there's enough space available to allow for some movement in the market
Right. Tenant turnover, people moving in and out.
without creating too much surplus that drives down rents.
Exactly. You want some vacancy, but not too much.
How do you figure out what that magic number is?
Well, you have to do some research. Look at historical vacancy rates for similar properties in the area. How long it usually takes to lease units.
Ah, so it's like being a real estate detective again.
Precisely. You're gathering clues to understand the dynamics of that specific market. Okay, so we've covered these big, powerful market forces that are like the puppet masters behind the scenes. Now, I'm really eager to dive into those 5 essential forecasting elements, those specific things that investors need to analyze.
Yeah, let's get into the nitty-gritty. This is where we move from those big picture trends to the actual numbers on the spreadsheet.
This is where the rubber meets the road. I am ready.
All right, let's start with the rental revenue. You might think it's just about collecting rent checks, but there's more to it than meets the eye.
Really? More than cashing checks. Tell me more.
Oh yeah. First, you have to understand the leases themselves. When do they expire? What are the terms?
Makes sense. You're not just looking at the current rent, you're thinking about how those terms might change in the future.
Right. Are there any built-in rent increases?
Yeah.
And then there's the tricky part for about figuring out the current market rent. You have to research recent leases for comparable properties.
Ah, so you can't just rely on the seller's word or some outdated listing. You have to dig deeper and see what similar properties are actually renting for.
Exactly. And don't forget those leasing incentives we talked about earlier, like free rent periods or contributions to tenant improvements.
Right. The effective rent might be different from the face rent stated in the lease.
Exactly. It's about looking beyond the surface.
Okay, so we've analyzed current rents, but how do you predict how rents might change in the future? That seems a bit like reading tea leaves.
Well, it can feel that way, but there are ways to make educated projections, like looking at historical rental growth patterns in the area.
So you're looking for trends and patterns, like have rents been steadily increasing? Are there cyclical ups and downs?
Exactly. And remember those market variables we talked about? They play a big role here too. If the economy's strong and there's high demand for rentals, you can expect rents to keep rising.
But if there's suddenly a surplus of properties or the job market weakens, you might need to adjust your expectations.
Precisely. Projecting rental revenue is dynamic. You have to be flexible.
So you're analyzing the current market, historical trends, and those larger economic forces to create a realistic picture.
Exactly. Yeah. Even with the best projections, you can't forget about vacancy rates. Even in a hot market, you have to be realistic about empty units.
Right, that vacancy allowance is our buffer to help account for those times when a unit is empty and not generating income.
Precisely. Okay, we've tackled rental revenue. Now let's move on to those other expenses that can eat into your profits. Those pesky property costs.
Let's do it. I'm ready to tackle those head on.
Right.
All right, so we've covered rental revenue. Pretty complex stuff, huh?
It's definitely more than meets the eye, that's for sure.
Now let's move on to those other expenses, those costs that can really eat into your profits. The, what was it, property costs, I think?
Yeah, property costs. These are often overlooked, but incredibly important when you're trying to forecast cash flow. The blog post really emphasizes this, You got to scrutinize the seller's claims.
Yeah, I can imagine. It's like, they want to make the property look as attractive as possible, maybe downplay some of those expenses.
Exactly. Sometimes those costs are kind of hidden, or they've been putting off maintenance, just to make things seem rosier than they actually are.
It's like those home renovation shows where they like open up a wall and find all sorts of crazy stuff hidden behind it.
Exactly. You got to watch out for those red flags.
So what are some things investors should be looking for? Like, how can you tell if something's fishy?
Well, if the operating expenses seem unusually low compared to similar properties in the area, that's a big one. Like, if everyone else is paying way more for things like property taxes and utility.
Okay, that's a good tip. What else?
Another red flag is if the seller hasn't been keeping up with regular maintenance, could mean you're inheriting a whole bunch of problems down the road, expensive problems.
Oof, yeah. So it's not just about trusting the seller, you got to do your own homework.
Absolutely. Get a professional inspection, look at those expense records carefully, don't just take their word for it.
So what specific expenses should investors be factoring in? I mean, besides the obvious things.
Well, you've got property taxes, of course. Insurance, utilities, ongoing maintenance. Don't forget about landscaping, pest control.
Right, right. And if you're not managing the property yourself, property management fees.
Exactly. And here's a key point. Even if you have tenants who are covering some of those costs through a net lease agreement, where they pay for things like property taxes and insurance, those high operating expenses can still come back to bite you.
How so? I thought if the tenant's paying, it's not your problem.
Well, think about it. If your operating expenses are way higher than other comparable properties, it can make your property less attractive to potential tenants.
Ah, I see. So even if you're not directly paying those costs, it can still affect your bottom line.
Exactly. It's all about finding that balance, offering competitive rental rates while keeping those expenses under control.
Okay, makes sense. So we've covered the day-to-day expenses, but what about those big, scary capital expenditures? The ones that can really drain your bank account?
Ah, yes, the dreaded CapEx. These are the major repairs and replacements that require a significant upfront investment. Things like a new roof, upgrading the HVAC system, fixing major plumbing or electrical issues.
Those are the ones that keep me up at night.
That's
But ignoring them won't make them go away, right?
Nope, definitely not. And the longer you put them off, the more expensive they're likely to get.
So deferred maintenance might seem like a good idea in the short term.
Yeah, but it can backfire big time.
Give me an example.
Okay, imagine you have a small roof leak.
Mm-hmm.
If you ignore it, that little leak can turn into water damage, mold, even structural problems.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that's not good.
And a neglected HVAC system. That could become super inefficient, unreliable, and lead to higher energy bills. Plus, your tenants won't be happy.
So it's like preventative care. A little attention up front can save you a lot of headaches and money down the line.
Precisely. And when you're evaluating a property, you have to factor in its age, condition, the remaining life of those major components.
How do you even know that kind of stuff?
Well, you can get a professional inspection, of course. And this blog post mentions that large institutional investors, they often get these detailed engineering reports. Really dig deep into a property's condition.
Wow, those guys are serious. I guess it makes sense, though. They're investing a lot of money.
Yeah, they're not taking any chances. And while a regular investor like you or me might not need to go that far, it's still wise to set aside some reserves for future capital expenditures.
Like a rainy day fund for my property.
Exactly. A stash of cash specifically for those unexpected repairs and upgrades.
I like that. A rainy day fund for my real estate, baby. All right, so we've covered the day-to-day costs, the big capital expenditures. Now let's move on to that final piece of the puzzle. A value at sale.
All right, now we're thinking long term. Because most real estate investors, they're looking to eventually sell their properties and hopefully make a profit.
Right. But how do you predict what a property will be worth years down the road? That seems kind of impossible.
It's definitely tricky. But there are ways to make educated projections. The blog post talks about two main approaches. One is to look at historical price trends.
So, like, how have property values in the area changed over time?
Exactly. Are there any patterns you can see? Cyclical upswings and downturns.
And what are the projections for future appreciation in that market?
Right. So you're looking at the past to get a sense of the future. The other approach is called capitalizing future income. This one estimates the property's value based on the income it's expected to generate in the future.
So you're basically saying, how much is that future income stream worth today?
Exactly. You're looking at the projected rental income and then using a capitalization rate to determine its present value.
Capitalization rate.
Yeah, it's a way to estimate the potential return on a real estate investment
Yeah.
based on the income it generates. It's like, imagine you're buying a vending machine. You'd want to know how much money it's going to make each year to figure out what price you'd be willing to pay for it.
Right.
The cap rate is kind of similar. It helps us figure out what a property is worth based on its income-generating potential.
Okay, that makes sense. So a property that generates a lot of income relative to its price, it would have a higher cap rate.
Exactly. And that could make it a more attractive investment.
So projecting future value involves looking at historical data, current market trends, and making some educated guesses about the future.
It's like peering into a crystal ball, but with a little bit more data to guide you.
And don't forget about those market variables we talked about earlier. Inflation, interest rates, economic growth, they all play a part.
Absolutely. They're all interconnected.
Wow, this is a lot to take in, but I'm really starting to see how understanding these forecasting principles can empower investors to make smarter decisions.
That's the point. It's not about becoming a financial guru overnight. It's about building that foundation of knowledge and having the right tools to analyze potential investments.
I'm feeling a lot more confident about navigating the world of real estate now, but before we wrap things up, I have a question for you. What are your thoughts on how these forecasting principles can be applied to other areas of life? I mean, beyond just real estate.
That's a great question. And it's something I think our listeners should ponder as we move into the final part of our deep dive. How can we use these principles to make smarter decisions, not just in real estate, but in any area where we're making a bet on the future? Welcome back to the deep dive. We've been exploring this really fascinating world of real estate cash flow forecasting. Really learning about how much complexity there is, but also how rewarding it can be to understand those principles. And before the break, we left our listeners with a really interesting question, I thought. How can these forecasting principles, these tools and ideas, be applied to other areas of life beyond just real estate?
Yeah, I think that's such a great question. And it's one that I've thought about a lot too. Because when you think about it, whether we're investing in stocks or starting a business or even just planning for retirement, all of these things, we're constantly making decisions based on our expectations of the future. Right, we're all trying to anticipate what that future holds, trying to make choices that align with our goals.
Exactly. And so those same principles we've been talking about in real estate,
Yeah.
like analyzing historical trends, understanding those key market variables, thinking about potential risks and rewards.
They all have applications in these other areas of our financial lives too.
Exactly. It's not just about real estate.
So it's about moving away from those gut feelings and those emotional reactions that can sometimes lead us astray.
Yeah, and moving toward a more informed, data-driven approach.
Making smarter decisions, being more strategic.
You got it. Whether you're a seasoned investor or just starting out, these forecasting principles can help us become more savvy, better financial planners.
It's all about having the right tools to analyze those opportunities and those potential pitfalls.
And it starts with a willingness to learn, right?
Right, absolutely. Asking questions, being curious, digging a little deeper.
Not just accepting things at face value.
This deep dive has been such an incredible journey into this world of real estate cash flow forecasting. From those big market variables to those specific forecasting tools. We've even explored how those principles can help us in other areas of our financial lives.
It has been a lot of fun.
And I hope our listeners feel a little more empowered, more equipped to navigate this complex world of investing.
I hope so too.
And remember, everyone, this is just the beginning. There's always more to learn. And we'll be back with more fascinating deep dives like this in future episodes, so stay tuned.
Absolutely. We'll keep exploring.
Thanks for joining us and happy forecasting.